Hey guys, welcome to this episode of Romcast. This week we are joined by a special guest, Corey Millar. Corey is a powerlifting athlete and coach. Corey, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you for having me again. I just wanted to say from the outset, it's a real honor to be here a second year in a row, and I feel very privileged that you asked me to come back. So thank you.
Absolutely, mate. So Corey is one of the subject matter expert coaches at the upcoming Range of Motion Athlete Camp, making a return visit after what actually turned out to be a really successful module that you ran last year. And I know since the event, I've just had so many people who've just changed something really small because of the work that you did with them during the camp, and they've just gone from strength to strength. So thanks so much for what you did last year and for being on the team again this year.
Yeah, most welcome.
For those people who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself as a coach and as an athlete.
Yeah, sure. So I've been competing now in powerlifting for, it will be coming up to 11 years. In that time, I've probably visited the platform 27 times, of which I've fluctuated in weight classes anywhere as low as 67.5 and anywhere as high as 90. So there's a fair bit of breadth in terms of experience, not only with my own body shape and type and strength, but also just learning that the game changes dramatically when the leverages change as large as they do from 67 to 90 kilos. So personal bests, deadlift is by far my favorite, but personal best squat is 215 at around 75, a 142 bench, and a 255 deadlift, of which it's every athlete's story in the strength game, but it sort of feels like you're just scratching your potential. And so being a natural athlete as well, and a lightweight natural athlete, there's a lot of things that I have to do on the daily, on the weekly, and seasonally that, one, grow strength, but just maintain it. Anyone knows as a natural based athlete that as soon as they take a week or two off, man, you start losing gains like crazy. So it's been an interesting journey this far.
Yeah, I heard an interesting stat in terms of that strength loss at a lecture I attended this week, and it was talking about the fact that as we age, we lose about 1 to 2% of our strength every year. And then the really scary stat was if you have a week of bed rest, you lose that same 1 to 2%. So you can lose the same amount in a week by doing nothing that you do over a year as part of this natural aging process, which I thought was pretty scary.
Yeah, I read your comments on that, and I found it super interesting because the eccentric part of the movement, particularly with the deadlift, is something that I've been experimenting with more and stepping into I've done 2 competitions this year. I did the deadlift only competition called the Hulk Smash in February, which from an athlete standpoint, a personal standpoint, was awful. I just wasn't happy with how the day unfolded. Subsequently, I was the best person to turn up on the day, so it was my first overall win. So I actually won the competition itself. But as any athlete knows, if it wasn't a perfect execution, they know there's more in the tank. They just sort of strive for better. And so I changed a few things and started to focus more on the eccentric of the deadlift itself. And in, last weekend, Saturday, we had the state championships, and my deadlift had gone up 15 kilos in 4 months. And I'm talking like, I'm not a beginner. I'm a seasoned lifter. That was competition 26 to 27. So it's not like, beginner gains or anything. 15 kilos is a lot. If someone could do that in 2 years, they'd be like,
oh, yeah.
So,
yeah. I love 2 things about what you've just said. Firstly, that you're still learning and there's no ceiling on this. I mean, there's always somewhere to go. There's always something else to learn. And I think that brings me to the second point, which is you have spent so much time learning that it makes you a really good teacher. So you come from this huge background of competing in this sport for such a long time. Talk to me about how you have then transferred that and your experiences coaching other athletes.
Yeah. So, anyone that does often develops a passion to share. And that's just something that I've always had. I've always had an eye for movement patterns. And at the beginning, I wasn't very well able to explain that to other people or expound upon it for others. But as I've sort of developed the craft and now looking back at it, probably worked with hundreds of athletes in different things, just being able to serve people in getting them stronger is sometimes more satisfying than getting yourself stronger. It's one thing to sort of stand there as an athlete and say, I've achieved this, this, and this. It's another thing to look back at your team or your clients and go, and they've achieved this. And, it's one person's individual achievements versus a plethora of people, so it's really enjoyable for that. I tend to sort of step in and out of the coaching circle depending on, what phase of life we're in, always training as an athlete, and always doing sort of these seminars year to year in different respects. But sort of one-to-one coaching, I find, as you would be able to relate to, sometimes the emotional drain that an individual undergoes, it sort of detracts from the training itself. And so I find myself sort of stepping into the pool here and there. But I have an athlete that I'm training up now, a female athlete and a male athlete for the coming nationals in August. So that'll be pretty exciting. That'll be the first time I've got two athletes stepping into the nationals of different genders. So,
and you'll be competing at nationals as well after your success at States? Yeah, great.
Yeah, so coaching, competing.
Cool. Okay, so what I'd like to do, based on the fact that you've worked with so many athletes of different levels and have competed at a high level yourself, I want to try and identify 3 easy tips that you have that will allow people to make a big difference in their strength, a big difference in their powerlifting ability.
Yep.
Without a huge amount of work. So we're not talking, spend 10 years and compete on the platform twice a year and eat this and take these supplements, but just nice, easy, low-hanging fruit for people that they can start applying tomorrow, and we'll see some pretty drastic changes. So what would your first tip be, Corey? And for each of these, we'll talk about maybe an example of someone who's taken this tip on board and seen some improvements.
Sure. I would say it seems like a no-brainer, and a lot of people probably are intrinsically aware of the need to do this, but just fail at it miserably, and that's measure your variables. I heard a phrase a while back, and it sort of stuck with me, and you can't manage what you don't measure. And so if you don't know where your 1 rep maximum is, within 3 months, how do you program accordingly? Or if you don't know where your deficiencies lie because they haven't been measured, and they're just subjective, and you go, every time I do hamstring work, doesn't feel great, so I just avoid it. Like, there's no objective truth to that. And so I've noticed both from, beginners that walk into the gym on their first day to people that have been there for 20 years, the ones that don't measure their variables are the ones that tend to stagnate quicker than most and stay stagnated for a while. So I can probably think of a prime example. Look, blanket statement, most beginners don't measure anything, and that's because they haven't had time in the game to know what to measure and how to measure. But you'll never be penalized for measuring too many variables.
No.
Considering too many variables when making changes may, sort of be paralysis by analysis. But a classic example is a friend of mine who competed back in the Powerlifting World Championships when they were held here in Sydney a few years ago. And he posted somewhere in the range of 227.5 kilo bench press, so 500 pounds. Everyone's got a mate who can bench 500 pounds, and yet they don't. And so it's no mere feat for a human to do. And it took him more than 5 years to progress 2.5 kilos.
Wow.
And it's not that he's reached his physical or genetic ceiling. It's just that it was so haphazard with measuring the volume input, the intensity output, the recovery, like that whenever you'd ask him, it would sort of be like, I think I'm getting stronger. It's feeling really good at the moment. And then the next meet had come around and the body weight will have changed. The bench press wouldn't have been as good. There was a lagging component somewhere, and you're just like, what happened? And this reoccurred for 5 years, and it was through no lack of trying. It was through no lack of pushing on the gas pedal as hard as he possibly could. But the gaping hole for his plan was just didn't know what he was doing sometimes. There's no measurement.
I think we need to see our bodies like petri dishes where we say, okay, if we add a couple of drops of this, what happens? What grows? If we add a pinch of this, what bubbles up out of this test tube? And it's very hard to control these variables, and it's very hard to actually know what we've put in to create this change. So I think that's a good tip, and it's obviously something that people can start from their very next training session, which I think is really good.
Start recording it, and don't haphazardly do it. Like, pick parameters that you want to record. The easiest ones for powerlifting is, sets, reps, intensity, exercises done. And then you sort of record, what was the result after 3 months? Did your bench press go up? Did it stay the same? Did it go down? And then you can have a look. If you got a positive result and it was adequately positive, it wasn't like a 2.5 kilo jump in 12 months. It was like 20 kilos in 12 months. You go, what was the process that was in place at the time that was achieved? Can it be bettered, or do we just need to rinse and repeat?
Cool.
Yeah.
I think it's a great tip, and it's a tip that people can take into all facets of their training, not just the powerlifting stuff. What would your second tip be, Corey?
My second tip, I actually had another one planned, but I'm going to go on the fly with this one, so bear with me.
Yeah, go for it.
Instead of creating goals to achieve, create processes to do. And so let me explain that a little bit further. People that create goals have no accountability to achieve those goals, even if they tell someone else about it, even if they post it all over their Instagram and tell everyone how they're going to be the next big thing. Without the processes in place, which plays off of those measuring variables, the goal could be, I want to deadlift 1,000 kilos, which is impossible. Do you know what I mean? It could be as astronomical or as achievable as you like. Without the process in place of, I'm going to turn up and I'm going to do X, Y, Z for X amount of minutes, for X amount of weeks, there's nothing there, and the process is a strategy that you can follow day in and day out, is where a goal is something you look at that's off in the distance on the horizon. There's no accountability to that. That's not to say don't have goals, but processes to achieve those goals should be more important than the goal itself. Yeah,
I think sometimes people have the goal and then leave it at that. And as you say, it's important to know where the destination is, where you're trying to get to, so then you can work your way back and establish what those planned habits or those more sort of process-based goals are to get there. But it's like saying, I want to get to the 5th story of a building, and you leave it at that, and there's no indication of how to get there. Whereas if you say, I'm going to take a step, I'm going to take a step, I'm going to take a step, even if you don't have that end outcome-based goal, you will eventually get there. So
yeah, you'll find yourself at the 5th story looking back at all the things that you go, oh, wow, that's actually a lot of cumulative work.
Yeah. Do you have an example of someone maybe who has set a goal and not the process, or maybe someone who has set the process and had some good achievements or results from that?
Yeah, I could definitely say myself as a case study. Yeah. Every year people get into the habit of setting these goals for their year ahead. And I found that for so many years learning, and don't get me wrong, like I'm very seasoned when it comes to powerlifting, but the minute you think you know it all is the minute you start to let, insidious things seep into your training regime that before you know it will undo you completely. And so I was always in the habit of looking at where the pinnacle of the competitors were and shooting for somewhere in that vicinity and laying out, this is where I want my squat, this is where I want my bench, this is where I want my deadlift. And then the total would be, a result of those 3 combined lifts. And what I found is that every year the goal would look eerily similar, you know what I mean, in terms of its number.
Yep.
And it wasn't until I started going, man, stuff this for a game. I'm sick of writing down the same numbers or similar numbers on the whiteboard and being held accountable to that, looking at it every single day. Write down a strategy, head down, get into it, and then start doing it. And like I said, progress 15 kilos in 4 months as a natural athlete, no assistance.
Yeah.
So, and it was purely by, looking at the strategy and just getting in and doing it day in, day out, even on the days you didn't want to. Yeah.
So you have nationals in August, is that right?
Yeah.
So in the next few months between now and then, can you give us an insight into maybe one of these little strategies that instead of saying, I will deadlift 260, can you give us insight into one of these strategies, one of these little steps that you're going to be following in the next few months?
Yeah. So one thing that I did was, and coming back to like the managing the variables, is every single deadlift set that I do, which is probably one set before working sets, I begin filming and I scrutinize every single lift between the lifts so I can make the changes as I go. And rather than looking back at the lift and going, look how impressive that bicep vein was and how much the bar is bending and how quickly it moved, I actually scrutinize and go, where are the hips? Where are the knees? Are the shins perpendicular? Where's the shoulder point? Did it move in one fluid motion? Could it be faster? And I start to look at these variable points and strategize, okay, the knee came forward. How do I fix that? More pressure on the hamstring. I sort of look at myself and go, is this a mental cue? Do I have to think of my hamstrings, or is it a physical weakness? And in that case, then the strategy evolves into doing more hamstring accessory exercises. So that was something super practical that I could apply.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's a really good one. What's your third tip for us, Corey?
Third tip, I sort of alluded to it a second ago. There's usually two major ways to fix a movement. In terms of fix a movement, go from a 200 kilo deadlift to a 210 if you're maxing out. And that is either it's a strength issue or it's a movement pattern issue. Now, almost 90% of beginners that walk through the Musclepit doors for the first time will have their strength go up almost 10% in one session, without a lie. And that's just because they have really poor movement patterns. They don't understand summation of forces. They don't understand their leverages. They're making the movement harder for themselves than they need to. And so a lot of people as beginners, intermediates, and even advanced people, they sort of look at exercises and they go, I've been benching, 180 kilos now for the last 3 months and it hasn't gone anywhere. So rather than scrutinizing that and going, why is it going nowhere, or what strategies can be put in place to see something change and improve, they go, let's start doing close grip bench press. Let's start doing incline bench press. And they just change the goalposts, entirely. And so then they convince themselves that they're improving because they're like, yeah, man, my bench press is at 180, but my incline press has gone up from 150 to 160 to 170. It's like, yeah, but is your bench press improving or has it stayed the same again?
Yeah.
So rather than sort of distinguishing the difference between a movement floor pattern or a strength pattern, they just change that goalpost completely and move on to a different exercise, claiming to keep getting stronger, which, as any beginner will be able to tell you, the gains you get when you first do something are incredible, and you sort of wind up middle of the pack and realize that it's going to be a tough slog ahead to get out of this.
I think this is probably one of my favorite tips of the three, and not because I think it's any more valid than the other two, but in terms of people wanting something for less. I mean, everyone wants more for less. They want more return on less investment. And I feel like this is such a low-hanging piece of fruit for people. It can take so long to get strong. Like as soon as you get to a certain point and you're no longer a novice, it's hard to get strong. But as you say, if you can improve a lift by 10% just by making some little mental or physical cue tweaks, it's huge. I mean, it's almost something for nothing, which I think is going to appeal to a lot of people. Do you have an example of someone who you've worked with and made just a very small change and it's made a huge improvement to their total?
Yeah, it's funny, this morning, training at 5 a.m., you're limited to the amount of maximal strength that you can exert because you've just woken up from an 8-hour fast. You can only fit so much water, so many calories in that point of time before training. And so I was chatting to one of the new guys that's bumped into our group in the mornings at 5 a.m. And you could just see that he was really trying to test himself and to really sort of prove his worth within the group. And in doing so was testing his strength rather than training it. And I said to him, look, there's probably going to be 4 times a year where you test your strength and it's not in training. 5 a.m. is for training and comp day is for testing. And so if you find yourself at any given point having a movement be more hard than it feels like it should be, chances are you're testing that strength rather than training it. And if you've been a good athlete and you're monitoring those variables, you'll know where that relative strength lies to your 1 rep maximum, for this case, powerlifting. But prediction, not so much having seen it happen yet, but prediction, this gentleman in question, his total will probably go up at the next 3 lift comp by at least 40 kilos.
Yeah.
And we have maybe 2.5 weeks to work with him in that time. And I've seen it happen enough times now for me to go between 30 and 40 kilos will improve on his total.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I think those are 3 really good tips. And again, I love the fact that these are not things that people are going to have to spend years applying. Of course, if they apply them for years, they'll get huge benefits and huge results. But these are things that people can basically kick off next training session, which is cool.
Yeah.
As we talked about at the top, we are lucky enough to have you coming back as our subject matter expert coach for powerlifting for this year's Range of Motion Athlete Camp. Give us a little bit of a sneak peek into what the attendees can expect to be doing in this module with you and the sort of things they can expect to take away.
Yeah. So last year, we went through predominantly the squat and the bench press, squat and the deadlift, just because of time constraints. I think we got a little bit more time this year.
We do, yeah.
So I'm going to hope to break it down into an hour on the squat and an hour on the deadlift. And then if anyone does have any questions on the bench press, I know CrossFit isn't massive on the bench press. That doesn't mean its athletes shouldn't be training the bench press.
Absolutely.
Because it may pop up in a workout or two. But it'll probably work like that. The biggest thing that I think I can bring to the module that the athlete won't be able to do for themselves is that, 10, 11 years of experience in seeing other people's movement patterns and being able to recognize that immediate fix, and whether, shortcutting them to saying, hey man, this is hey man or woman, this is a strength issue, or hey, this is actually like a mental technique issue. Like your cues are a little bit off. And sometimes it's just a matter of having a different voice tell you something that you already knew or should have known in order for the penny to drop. And I think that's one thing that, you noted before we started on our conversation, is there was so many 1%ers that I was able to give to individuals that they've carried into the next 12 months of their training going, I can't believe that has had that much of an impact.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're tiny little 1%ers.
I know last year's event, we had a Facebook group set up where all the attendees could ask you subject matter experts questions in the weeks and months after the event. And I think there was one of the attendees who posted, and she said it had just completely changed how she'd squatted. And this was someone who'd been doing this style of exercise for several years.
Yep.
And she said she'd improved more in the 2 weeks after that workshop than she had in 3 years leading up to it. And again, it's just easy things to change if you have someone who is as expert and as experienced as you are. And yeah, I just think it had such an impact on people last year. I can't wait to see the same thing happen again.
Yeah, and I think my style of teaching is I try to teach people in such a way that they learn it in order to teach it. Yep. At the end of the day, if I'm able to teach you a concept, my expectation of you as the athlete is to not only execute that concept correctly, but then to be able to take those principles and teach someone else. And that's ultimately what we're here to do, is just to serve one another and spread the knowledge as much as we can.
Yeah, I think that's huge. It's such a good way to leverage the value that we're able to provide to people. It's not just if I help one person, I'm helping one person, but you're helping everyone that they then have the power to impact as well, which I think it's a really cool philosophy to have.
Yeah, they can apply that to a few other things in life too.
Absolutely, yeah. Corey, how can people follow you on social media? Where can they find you, Facebook or Instagram, and maybe watch your progress in the lead up to Nationals as well? Yeah,
sure. So my Facebook and socials are just Corey.Millar, which I'm sure the spelling will be in the post that goes up in regards to this video. So they can probably just search for me there. Direct message me any questions that they have. I'm happy to get back to them. I'm not always quick at getting back to friend requests. Don't take that personally. It just takes me a little while sometimes. I don't often post a lot of training related stuff to my social media, though it is there.
Yep.
You definitely find it. one of the members of our training group in the morning actually live streams all of our session, in its entirety on, I think it's called Twitch.
Okay.
And so if anyone's interested in looking at that, find me on Facebook and I can link you into the feed. But you do have to be up at 5 a.m. or be able to watch Twitch within the next, I think it works 24 hours after the video goes live. You've got a little while to watch it.
Great.
So, yeah,
Cool.
It's not polished. It's in real time. There's the gym banter, but it's good value.
Yeah, which is exactly how it should be.
Mm.
Yeah. Corey, thanks so much for your time this morning. Thanks for those 3 tips. I love the fact that they are so applicable. All the best in your lead up to Nationals in August. We'll be following your progress closely. And I'm super pumped and can't wait to work with you again at the athlete camp come later this year. So thanks very much, Corey.
Looking forward to it, Dan. Thanks again, mate.
Thanks, mate. See ya.